Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I was 59 when I realized I had been lying to myself for nearly 2 decades, lying with a smile, a nod, and a quiet acceptance of life as it was. My name is Elaine, and in the unfolding pages of this story, you'll discover how a single flicker of memory led me down a path of secrets, regrets, and a startling confrontation that forced me to redefine everything I believed about love, marriage, and second chances. It started, as so many revelations do, on an evening when I expected nothing unusual. The day had been a series of mundane tasks: paying bills, picking up groceries, chatting with my grown daughter on the phone about her new promotion. My husband, Lionel, had been at his workshop tinkering with some old furniture. We'd had dinner in our usual quiet manner: lasagna, salad, a bit of idle talk about our neighbor's loud cat. Then he excused himself to watch a historical documentary in the den. I, never one for documentaries, took a cup of tea into the living room and decided to sift through old photo albums. For no particular reason, I opened a dusty album from a shelf rarely touched these days. Inside were pictures of us in our early 40s, still relatively spry, though the stress lines of adulthood had started marking our faces. One snapshot made me pause. Lionel and I standing in front of a beach house with a "for sale" sign behind us, both of us beaming ear to ear. That was the trip we'd taken soon after he'd inherited some money from his aunt. We'd toyed with the idea of buying a little getaway place by the sea, a dream we never followed through on. My heart clenched with a memory: the warmth of the sun on my shoulders, the smell of salt and seaweed, the laughter in Lionel's voice when he tried to push me into the shallows. It was a fleeting moment of genuine joy. But as I stared, I recalled something odd about that trip: how Lionel had vanished for a few hours one afternoon, claiming he needed to check something out. I'd teased him about going to scout hidden treasure, but he'd returned subdued and wouldn't explain. Until now, I'd never given it much thought. But for some reason, seeing that photo triggered an unease. Perhaps it was just a reminder that we used to be more spontaneous, more in love, or maybe it was an echo of a secret I'd chosen to overlook. I closed the album, unsettled. My mind drifted. Had I let years of routine smother the curiosity that once defined me? Over time, Lionel and I had developed such separate schedules. His workshop projects, my volunteer committees. We rarely did anything truly together anymore. Sleep came fitfully that night, my mind turning over half-formed questions about what we'd lost along the way. The next day, a moment of pure happenstance deepened my suspicions. I was retrieving Lionel's phone from the workshop because our son was calling, and I wanted to pass it to him quickly. But as soon as I picked it up, it buzzed with a text. An unsaved number. "Hope you haven't forgotten about our meeting. Missing you." My stomach clenched. A meeting. Missing you. The tone felt personal. My heart hammered so loudly, I was sure Lionel would hear it from across the house. I debated whether to open the text, but it was already visible on the lock screen. My hands trembling, I scrolled just enough to see the previous message. Something about the place by the sea. Need to talk in person. Froze. The sea. That old beach memory from the photo album rushed back. My pulse throbbed. Was Lionel meeting someone from that time? My mind leapt to the worst conclusions. An affair or some long-standing relationship he'd hidden. Part of me wanted to burst into the workshop, wave the phone in his face, demand answers. But something in me held back. If there was a secret, maybe I needed more proof, more clarity, because a confrontation without understanding might just push him to hide it further. Trying to keep my voice steady, I handed Lionel his phone, muttered something about our son trying to call. He thanked me, looking preoccupied. I must have worn my tension on my face because he asked, "You all right?" I forced a smile and nodded, slipping away before he could see the turmoil in my eyes. Days turned into a week, and the tension gnawed at me. I considered confiding in my daughter, but worried it might color her relationship with her dad. So I kept silent, on alert for any sign that Lionel was slipping away to this mysterious meeting. Then, on a Friday morning, he told me he had to head out of town for a day or two, something about picking up specialized woodworking tools from an estate sale near the coast. My stomach flipped. Coast, see old illusions. I asked if I could come along, a smile plastered on my face. He hesitated, then claimed it'd be too boring for me, just a bunch of dusty garages. A spike of hurt told me he was hiding something. He left later that day, a small overnight bag slung over his shoulder. I had the house to myself, a swirling pit in my gut, wondering if he was going to see the person behind that cryptic text. Should I follow him? Would that be too dramatic, or exactly what was needed? By evening I decided I had to know. I threw some clothes in a bag and jumped into my car, adrenaline fueling me. If I was wrong, if it was truly about tools, I'd just come off as a worried wife. But if I was right, I needed to confront it. A gnawing voice in my head repeated, "Better the ugly truth than a comfortable lie." The drive was tense, about 3 hours through winding roads. Late in the evening, I arrived in that small seaside town we'd once dreamed of calling home. Memories flooded me. The salt-tinged air, the distant roar of waves, the scattered cottages. I had no clue where Lionel would be. My best guess was the old beach house we'd once viewed, though it had sold to some other couple. On a whim I drove there. The place was dark, quiet, no sign of life. I felt foolish. Maybe he was truly at an estate sale miles away. Then, as I turned back onto the main coastal road, I glimpsed a familiar silhouette. Lionel's pickup truck, parked outside a small cafe, lights still on inside though it was past normal closing time. My heart thundered. I pulled over a bit down the street. Through the cafe's big window, I could see Lionel sitting at a corner table across from a woman, maybe around his age, silver-streaked hair, wearing a blue sweater. They leaned toward each other in intense conversation. My mouth went dry. I gathered the nerve to walk closer, hugging the edge of the building. My chest constricted as I peeked around the glass. Their expressions were serious, not exactly romantic, but deeply personal. She placed her hand on his, and I saw sorrow in his eyes. Every instinct screamed to burst inside and demand answers. Yet I found myself rooted to the spot, tears in my eyes. After a moment, Lionel slid a folded paper across the table. She took it, her gaze brimming with emotion. Then he stood, gave her a brief hug, polite if a bit sad, and left. I dashed back to my car, sinking low so he wouldn't spot me. My tears spilled then. If it was an affair, they sure acted more like two people sharing heartbreak than lovers. Once Lionel's truck disappeared down the road, I gathered my courage and stepped into the cafe, adrenaline thrumming. The woman was still at the table, staring at the folded paper in her hand. She looked startled when I approached, and I saw worry flicker across her features. "Hi," I managed, voice shaking. "I'm Lionel's wife. You must be Celia or—" I realized I had no idea who she was. The woman's eyes widened. For a few excruciating seconds I thought she might bolt. But then she exhaled, gesturing for me to sit. "Sharon," she said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. We should have told you from the start." "Told me what?" I demanded, tears threatening again. "Are you too?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, not the way you're thinking. This is complicated." Her voice was thick with emotion. She hesitated, then said, "I'm his sister." Froze. Sister. My mind blanked. Lionel never mentioned a sister besides the older half-siblings from his dad's first marriage. They lived out of state, and I'd met them. Could there be another half-sibling? My disbelief must have shown because she sighed, tears glinting in her eyes. "He only found out a few years ago. Your father had an affair decades back. My mother raised me alone, but she kept his identity a secret until her death. I tracked Lionel down after reading some old letters. That's why we met at the beach a couple of years ago. It's been a roller coaster. He insisted on telling you eventually, but I guess he was afraid it would upend your marriage or cast a shadow on your family's memories. So we've been meeting in secret." My legs felt weak. I sank into the chair, shocked. This was so far from the scenario I pictured. I'd expected a mistress or ex-lover, some fling, not a hidden sister. My chest pounded with relief, anger, confusion all at once. He never told me. Why would he keep that from me? Sharon shrugged, looking pained. He said you were going through a hard time then, dealing with health issues, your father's passing. He worried it was too big a bomb to drop. Then, as time went on, it got harder to bring up. So we tried to figure things out quietly. We only meet occasionally to discuss estate matters, or memories from my mother's diaries. We discovered your father actually owned that beach property for a short time. That's why the sea was significant. Lionel's been grappling with the reality that part of his childhood story isn't true. Emotion welled up in me. So many questions collided in my mind. Did Lionel think I was too fragile for the truth? Why didn't he trust me enough to handle this? My eyes burned with unshed tears. So this is what tonight was about. I gestured vaguely to the cafe. She nodded. I found more letters, apparently from your father to my mom, referencing some inheritance. Lionel wanted to see them, figure out if we needed to contact a lawyer about any old claims. We're both uncertain. She lowered her gaze, voice trembling. He never meant to hurt you. He's just trying to protect your memories of your dad. It's complicated. Your father had a secret life, and Lionel's been mourning the father he thought he knew. Felt like the room was spinning. The confusion, the heartbreak. Yet it wasn't the heartbreak I'd anticipated. Yes, I was relieved Lionel wasn't cheating. But the betrayal of him thinking I couldn't handle this was so painful in its own way. I need to talk to him, I whispered finally. Sharon squeezed my hand, looking equally torn. She gave me her number, said she was sorry for the secrecy, and left, the folded paper clutched to her chest. I drove back to the small motel I'd hastily booked for the night. My mind reeled. My father, who had always been so stoic, so proud, had fathered a child I never knew about. Lionel discovered it, and instead of confiding in me, he carried that burden alone for years, meeting Sharon in secret to unravel the threads of a complicated legacy. I felt hurt, but also a strange pang of empathy for him. How many nights had he lost sleep over how to tell me our entire family story was built on a lie? That night I hardly slept. By morning, I decided I had to confront Lionel calmly. I texted him that I was in town, asked him to meet me at a diner on the main strip. He sounded startled but agreed. An hour later, he walked in, shoulders tense, guilt plain on his face the moment he spotted me. We ordered coffee, each waiting for the other to speak. Finally, he broke the silence. I guess you know. My throat felt tight. You guessed I found out about Sharon. A tear slipped down my cheek. He nodded, burying his face in his hands briefly. I'm sorry, he murmured. I was going to tell you. I just kept waiting for the right time, and it never came. A swirl of emotions erupted. Anger, sadness, relief, betrayal. Why would you keep such a massive secret from me? I asked, trying not to raise my voice in the busy diner. I thought you were having an affair. That's how little I knew. Do you know how painful that was? He looked genuinely horrified. I never wanted you to suspect that. Oh no. Your father's memory was so important to you. You spoke of him like a hero. And I found out he had a whole other life, fathered Sharon, then left them behind. I knew it would break your heart. Then, you were dealing with your medical scare that year, and Dad's funeral was so emotional. I couldn't bring myself to add to your burden. By the time life calmed down, I felt like I'd missed the window, and telling you would just open old wounds. Tears streamed down my face. The betrayal stung, but I also felt his heartbreak. Lionel, we're partners. You don't protect me by cutting me out. You protect me by letting me share the load. Did you think so little of me that I'd crumble? He reached across the table, took my hands. No, of course not. I was stupid. Selfish. I tried to handle it alone, but it's been tearing me up. Sharon wanted to tell you so many times, but I kept saying not yet. We were unraveling secrets about your father's old business dealings, some possible inheritance issues. I didn't want to drag you through that. But it wasn't my decision to make alone. Bitterness swelled in my chest. You're right. It wasn't. We sat in that tension for a moment. Then I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. But I want to figure this out together. I want to meet Sharon properly, see those letters. Know the truth about my father. I deserve that much, don't I? Relief flooded his face, though it was tinged with sorrow. Yes, I'll do anything to make this right. I'm so sorry I hurt you with my silence. That day we drove together to the same cafe from the night before. Sharon was cautious but joined us. I sat between them, my husband and this half-aunt I never knew existed, sifting through old letters referencing my father's hidden relationship, estate matters, and cryptic references to property transactions near the ocean. It was surreal, heartbreaking. My father, the stoic man who taught me how to fish, who never missed a Christmas, had led a double life. He'd fathered a child, left her mother to raise Sharon alone, and only sporadically sent money, which eventually allowed Sharon's mother to buy that small beach place. The sale years later had funded Sharon's college, ironically. My father and Sharon's mother corresponded for decades. After my father's death, Sharon found these letters, recognized my father's name, and tracked Lionel down. The rest was a saga of confusion, guilt, sadness, and Lionel's misguided attempt to shield me from it all. I cried that afternoon, tears of betrayal for the father I'd idolized. But also tears of gratitude that Sharon wasn't alone in this secret. We parted ways with an odd sense of closeness. She told me softly, "I always wanted a sister figure. I guess better late than never." We exchanged numbers, promising to keep in touch. I recognized a reflection of my father in her eyes, a piece of me I never knew existed. It was overwhelming but also felt oddly right. Lionel and I drove back to the motel, exhausted. I wrestled with a flurry of emotions. Heartbreak over my father, lingering anger at Lionel, curiosity about Sharon's life. Late that night, Lionel took my hand. "What now?" he asked, his voice trembling with raw honesty. "Do we bury this secret again, or do we face it head-on?" I gripped his hand back. "We face it. Together. No more secrets. Ever." He nodded, relief softening the tension in his jaw. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt a spark of the closeness we'd once shared. Maybe nearly losing me, or me nearly losing him, had jolted us out of our silent patterns. In the weeks that followed, we returned home, but everything felt different. Over coffee in our own kitchen, we talked about whether to share this story with our kids. Should they know they have a half-aunt? After some discussion, we decided to be honest. Our daughter, stunned at first, eventually expressed excitement. She said, "Hey, more family is always welcome." Our son was more reserved, but came around after a while. Meanwhile, Lionel and I sought counseling to unpack the emotional strain. We acknowledged how we'd both let fear, his fear of hurting me, my fear of being shattered, erode our marriage. But fear only grows when kept in the dark. Bringing it into the light, painful as it was, gave us a chance to heal. We visited Sharon a few more times. She showed me old photographs of her childhood, told me stories of how her mother used to mention a distant father who couldn't break free from his responsibilities. It was eerie to realize my father had chosen me and my siblings, leaving her an afterthought. It hurt, but it also softened my heart, understanding that everyone is flawed, that even the people we idolize carry burdens we don't see. Lionel apologized repeatedly, not just for the secrecy, but for underestimating my strength. He admitted he'd grown used to seeing me as delicate after my health scare a few years back, forgetting that I've always been capable of handling life's storms. I forgave him, though not without tears and the occasional flash of anger. Because true forgiveness, I learned, involves letting ourselves feel the anger fully, then choosing to move on from it. Strangely, that sense of unity we developed, shared secrets finally unearthed, rekindled a spark in our relationship. We started going on more walks, hand in hand, talking about how quickly life can shift. If I felt suspicious or uneasy, I'd ask him directly. He'd answer openly. No more locked phones or unexplained outings. We also began inviting Sharon over. She visited once for a casual Sunday lunch. The conversation was awkward at times, but also heartwarming. She shared tidbits about her job, her adult kids, and we realized how many parallels existed between our families. One evening, Lionel looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "I know this might be a bad time to bring up new dreams," he said, "but remember that old beach house fantasy? Maybe we can still do something like that. Not necessarily buy a place but rent one for a week, gather the family, even invite Sharon." The idea lit a spark in me. "We do talk about living more fully," I admitted. "Why not try?" The next thing I knew, we were searching online for a beach rental. A small step, but meaningful, like we were rewriting old regrets into new memories. It wasn't a perfect journey. Some nights, I'd still ache remembering the father who was both present and absent. Some days, Lionel felt guilty for meeting Sharon so many times behind my back. But we faced those feelings honestly. We told each other that if we were going to move forward, we'd do it with eyes wide open. No more illusions. The sense of relief was profound. Months later, we actually spent a weekend at a coastal cottage. Our kids came, and so did Sharon, tentative but hopeful. We cooked seafood, walked the shore, took photos reminiscent of those old snapshots from our album. I watched Lionel and Sharon comb the beach together, side by side, looking for shells. The sight made me tear up, but in a strangely beautiful way. Life doesn't always tie up with neat bows. My father is gone, the secrets still cast shadows, but in those shadows we found a new kind of family. As for me and Lionel, we discovered the importance of consistent communication. Some people assume that after decades of marriage, everything that needs to be said has been said, but the truth is that every stage of life brings new vulnerabilities. We realized if we stopped talking about our fears, his fear of causing me pain, my fear of being blindsided again, we'd drift back into old patterns. So we practiced daily check-ins, not forced or formal, just honest questions like, "How are you feeling about everything today?" Or, "Is there anything you're worried about?" That small shift made a tremendous difference. We felt safer being honest. I never expected to start my 60s with such a jolt of upheaval. But looking back, I see how it woke me up. I'd been drifting, letting life's routines dull my curiosity. Lionel's secret forced me to confront the fact that illusions don't protect us. They only prolong the inevitable pain of discovery. By facing the truth, painful as it was, we carved a path to deeper connection. Sure, I wish we could have learned that lesson without heartbreak. But sometimes heartbreak is the teacher we never asked for, showing us what we truly value. So now I share this story with you. Maybe you're facing secrets in your own life. Or maybe you sense a distance that's grown between you and someone you love. Don't wait for a crisis to break down the walls. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Offer each other the chance to be real, even if it's messy. Yes, you might uncover things that sting, but you might also find the strength to transform your bond into something more authentic. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your own experiences, and subscribe for more real-life tales that remind us life isn't done surprising us, no matter our age. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this season of my life, it's that it's never too late to confront the truth, heal old wounds, and choose each other all over again.